Mike Dennis's, I was so happy when Mike Dennis told me his topic because it's the Harlem Hellfighters. And too often people think that that doesn't include Kentucky, but it does. So.
Not only does it include Kentucky, it includes Boyle County. Just a little bit of background on the Harlem Hellfighters and the reason I chose to do this topic. This is the 100th anniversary of the entry of the United States.
Mike, will you use the microphone, please?
Yeah, use the mic. Might use the mic?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll move this over here. Okay, this is. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. This is the 100th anniversary of the entry of the United States into World War I. We ended the war in April of 1917, and I thought, you know, this would be probably a pretty good topic. The other reason I decided to do this is that at the Shelby City Cemetery, where a number of us have been working for almost 4 years now, we came across a gravestone for a man named Wallace Games. And it says on the stone, 369th Infantry, 93rd Division. Well, I didn't think too much about that until we were talking and Cindy Peck said, 369th? Oh my God, that's the Harlem Hellfighters. What? So anyway, a little bit of background on the Harlem Hellfighters, then I'll start my quick PowerPoint. A number of African Americans in 1917 enlisted in the 15th New York National Guard, which was primarily a black regiment in New York. They enlisted literally from all over the country into that unit. Once the war began, the unit was sent to Europe, but they were not sent to fight. In 1917, African Americans were not allowed to fight in the U.S. Army. They did supply duty, they did transport duty, they cleaned the bodies up off the battlefields and buried them. They did all the other support work, but they couldn't fight. Well, France was so desperate at the time that they basically borrowed the 15th and renamed them the 369th. So we had the spectacle of African Americans who are members of the U.S. Army fighting under the French flag in American uniforms with French helmets. Yeah, it's kind of complicated. What we also know about the 369th, the French called them the Men of Bronze out of respect. The Germans called them the Harlem Hellfighters out of fear. The Harlem Hellfighters spent 193, I've got it somewhere here, 193 or 198 days in combat, which is more time than any other unit in World War I. They never got a break, basically. They also never lost a foot of ground. There have been several books written about the Hellfighters. When they came home in February and April, there were like 1,000 of them. When they came home in February and April of 1919, they came home to a country that honored them with parades in New York City, through Harlem. You can watch videos on YouTube of people cheering, white and black, cheering the Harlem Hellfighters going down Fifth Avenue. And then when they went home, they oftentimes were lynched. What is a black man doing in an army uniform? Oh boy. This was the period of the Red Scare, 1919. This was the period of increasing racism in the country. This was the period of time, excuse me, when Jim Crow laws were being enforced all over the South and even in other parts of the country. This was the period of the Great Migration. Many African Americans from the time of about 1910 to about 1920 moved north. Conditions in the South were becoming so bad. It was better to be in the North, where at least you had a job, where at least maybe you could work for defense, where at least you could live a decent life. There was a tremendous amount of pushback against the 369th, but at the end of the fighting, the French government awarded the entire unit the Croix de Guerre. My French, I've forgotten a lot of it. It's the War Cross, and the Croix de Guerre is the highest military honor France gives. The entire unit won the Croix de Guerre. No other American unit won that. And the chills are going up my spine just thinking about that. A number of men from Kentucky. I have a list of men from Kentucky who served in the 369th, but the ones I want to focus on are the men from Boyle County from the 369th. You wouldn't think that a New York regiment would have a number of men from this little county serving, but there were. I'm going to go over briefly who they were. If you happen to be related to one of these 8 men, I have a handout up here next to my poster with a more complete biography of them. If you are descended from these men, or if you are related to these men, you need to be honoring them, and this year would be a prime time to do it. Okay, the first one, Leslie Kemper or Kemper. I've seen his name both ways, K-E-M-P-E-R or C-A-M-P-E-R. He joined the service in August of 1918, was in France from August of 1918 to the 12th of February 1919, and many of these other men served a very similar time period. They went over about the same time, they came back about the same time, several actually on the same boat. He was private, discharged in March of 1919, son of Jordan and April Mullins Kemper. He was born in Danville in 1887. Now again, I found his name as Kemper or Camper. Mary alluded to the idea of name changes. Yeah, we deal with that. Wallace Allen Games. I need to stop my PowerPoint here. It's just a brief one.
Do the F8, function F8 thing again.
What?
The laptop's a little hinky.
I need to close yours out. I'm thinking. Yeah, I just started yours again.
If I can't see anything.
Okay, now I can use this.
You won't be able to. And then lecture.
Okay, gotta love the technology. When it works, it's wonderful. The African-American Harlem Hellfighters from Boyle County, and if this is going to work, maybe it won't. Okay. Let's advance this way. This is a compilation of the Boyle County men who served in the 369th, with a side note on one particular person by the name of John Brown, known as Papa Skeets. He was not a member of the 369th, but we choose to honor him for various other reasons.
You can talk about that.
Okay. I mentioned that the Harlem Hellfighters were American soldiers fighting in American uniforms with French helmets. Wrong one. Okay, there we go. American soldiers, American uniforms, French helmets, and you can tell if you know anything at all about World War I helmets. These are French helmets, not American helmets. 190 plus days in combat like this, that's what these men went through. And 8 of them are from Boyle County. Okay. I found a number of pictures of Harlem Hellfighters coming home. While they were in Europe, by the way, a number of them were musicians, and they actually introduced jazz to France, interestingly enough. And jazz is still very popular in France. They had bands in Europe, And actually on the boats on the way back, the bands also played. I have no idea who these men are. I have no idea where they're from. And I would love to find a picture of an actual Boyle County Harlem Hellfire. But this is on the ship on the way, one of the ships on the way home. And again, I think these guys are kind of happy to be leaving Europe and coming home to what they hoped would be a better life, which in some cases was true. Sadly, in many cases, it was not. I love in particular the guy in the bottom right, who's way down. I think that's a beautiful picture. I just wish I knew who these men were.
Mike, in that first picture, those men, they all have the award.
Yes.
Yeah, I noticed that. Right there.
Yes.
Yeah, the award is on there. Yeah.
6 a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I actually several of us have seen the Croix de Guerre. We visited a man up in Versailles, who has a wonderful personal museum collection, and he showed us an actual Croix de Guerre from the 369th. That was kind of thrilling just to see that. Okay, several men from Boyle County. I'll give you all the names, then I'll just tell you a little bit about each one. Leslie Kemper, Ed Kemper, Wallace Games, Garrett G. Helm, Justin R. Hughes. Where's Michael? Okay, we have figured the connection between Michael and Justin Hughes. Frank Jenkins, Gatewood Lewis, Harry Moore, and Hubert Walker. Hubert Walker, I believe, is the uncle of Reverend Everhard Walker. So there's that connection. I mentioned a little bit about first one. Wallace Gaines, interestingly enough, lived on what was once called Jail Street in Junction City. If you go, it's now Lucas Street, and if you go down that street and cross where the railroad tracks used to be, it's the first White House on the left. We've actually identified where he lived. He was heavily involved, believe it or not, in baseball. And his team in Junction City played the Danville teams, which is a wonderful time, I think, to show something else we did not expect today. Thanks to Linda Smith, who runs the You Might Be From Boyle County Facebook page. She mentioned that she had a jersey from the Danville Yankees baseball team. Mm-hmm. This was Bunny Davis's team, and Linda's uncle, two uncles, were apparently the first two white men to play on Bunny's team. This is Linda's uncle's Danville Yankees shirt. And we are so proud. The chills going up my spine again, just seeing this. Wow. Okay. So I can imagine Wallace Gaines playing against that team at some point. Wallace Gaines married before he went to Europe. When he came back, his wife had died. He married again, a second wife. His second wife died. He had no children. He died in 1945 and is buried at the Shelby City Cemetery. This is his gravestone. I would like to get it replaced with a new one, but I don't want to lose the historical significance of this one. And as long as it's legible, keep it. When we first started working at the cemetery, you could drive down Shawnikas Road, and the grass was so high, you could not see this gravestone. It's about 5 feet from the road. It couldn't be seen 4 years ago. So this is our Wallace Games. Garrett Helm. Garrett Helm's kind of interesting because he was from Shelby City. He is buried at Hilldale. He's shown as Garnett Helm in the 1920 census. Don't think census records are accurate. Okay, not for a minute. There's all kinds of mistakes. I don't know much more about him than that. His mother was Betty Helm. Justin Hughes. I've seen his middle name as Rowe. I've seen it as Row-ender. I've seen it a number of different ways. He was inducted in 1918, served in the 801st Pioneer Infantry, which was one of those service groups that did all the dirty work nobody else wanted to do. And then he joined the 369th, discharged April 1919. His mother was Mrs. Mattie Hughes of Hedgeville, interestingly enough. Now we know the Hugheses are from the Clifton, Hedgeville area. By 1930, he was living in Detroit, Michigan, but he was living with several brothers and sisters. They all had good jobs. The family must have had a reasonably good income. And he died in 1959. The request for his military gravestone was made by Willie May Hughes of Detroit, and he was buried in the West Lawn Cemetery in Detroit, Michigan. The gravestone states that he was of the 369th, fortunately. Frank Jenkins, I don't know a great deal about him. I haven't been able to find much, except that his mother was Mrs. Fanny Jenkins. She lived at 515 Russell Street. That would have been near Dr. Thomas Dorham. He was living in Lexington when he registered for World War II. So he was still around. He was the son of Joshua and Fanny Knott Jenkins, and he married Zelma Ross. Gatewood Lewis, also from Hedgeville. You would think that a little community like Hedgeville would not have 2 Harlem Hellfighters, but they did. He also was in the 801st originally, and then joined the Harlem Hellfighters later. The problem with him is that his contact person is listed as Mrs. Mattie Jett, his sister of Point Lick, Texas. So somewhere along the line, there's a Texas connection there. Excuse me. Now, I did find a Gatewood Lewis who died in Detroit, Michigan in 1950. I don't know if he's the same one. It's not a common name, Gatewood, but Lewis is. Harry Moore resided on Lebanon Pike. He joined the 369th in October of 1918. And he was the son of Isaac and Mary Southern Moore. Died on the Alum Springs Road in 1946, and he's buried in Hilldale. Hubert Walker, inducted in Boyle County, born in Parksville, served again in the 801st, that unit that did everything that nobody else wanted to do. He was a machine gunner, interestingly enough. And his contact was his mother, Mrs. Mary Walker, whom I believe would be Eberhard's grandmother. He resided in Parksville, married at the A&M Church, Wilsonville Church, in 1922 to Katie Jane, I'm going to say Cowell, even though I want to say Caldwell. She resided on Persimmon Knob, and he died and was buried in 1958. He is buried in Wilsonville. So those are the 8 Boyle County Harlem Hellfighters. As I said, if you are related to them or descended from any of them, I have a more complete handout over here you're welcome to take. But there's one other person that we need to mention. I'm going to give you the facts of his life. That's about all. Facts can be dull and boring, or not. John Henry Brown was born in Stanford in 1895. His World War I draft registration card shows that he was living in Lockland, Ohio. This would have been in 1917. So again, he was part of that great migration north. He was employed by the railroad at the time, and he tried to exempt himself because he was the support of his mother. He was drafted in July of 1918, served in the 158th Depot Brigade, in the 813th Pioneer Infantry, and again, the 813th was one of those that were in combat but not fighting, so they were a support role. Some of the things that John Henry Skeets would have seen on the battlefield would have been just as emotionally and mentally disturbing as what any of the other soldiers in World War I would have seen. He went overseas in September of 1918, and he came back in July of 1919, demobilizing at Camp Dix, New Jersey, a place with which I am very familiar. On the passenger list, his mother is listed as Mrs. Mary Hunn of 101 Stanford Avenue, Danville. Now, I have not been able to find, where's James? I've not been able to find a connection to the Hunns yet, but I've got this information. 1920, he's listed at 101 McGrorty Avenue, which is now Wilderness Road. Maria Hunn, widow, is living with Charles Brown, who was a coal company teamster. So obviously, Mrs. Hunn had married a Brown sometime previously. Still working on that. In 1940, he's a baker. He's living with Emma Owsley Hayden, who's listed as a private home cook. They're not listed as married. During World War II, his draft registration card says he lived at 110 East Main Street. He was 47 years old, born in Stanford. The person who would know his address is Mrs. Emma Hayden. He's described as being 5'3", 135 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes, black hair, dark brown complexion with scars on his left forearm. On the 10th of July, 1973, he died at the home of Mrs. Sonora Jones in Danville. And we have Carolyn to thank for a lot of this information. Thank you, Carolyn. The bare facts of his life do not, however, tell the whole story.